what I learned about love, grief, and growing up from the summer I turned pretty. Like so many others, I've been in a chokehold over the summer I turned pretty for the last 10 weeks. I watch it by myself, I throw viewing parties, and I've even synchronized episodes with a friend in London my evening, her midnight, with real-time text exchanges. I'm doom scrolling Taylor Swift fan edits by Thursday. By Friday, I have taken the sun-bleached paperbacks off my shelf and am going over their tattered pages again. By the weekend, the show had crept into my Spotify algorithm and conversations. I'm 26 years old, and the show has captivated me in the same way that One Direction, Harry Potter, and The Vampire Diaries did. Now, however, things are different. Recalling who I was when I first read Jenny Han's trilogy and who I became afterward is what drives the obsession rather than running away. When I first read those books, I was 15 years old, lying on a sun lounger by the swimming pool on a beach vacation with my family, half thinking I was in Cousins Beach. In a matter of days, I destroyed them. I wasn't prepared to let the story end, so I listened to Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs Stay repeatedly, rented by Birdie on iTunes, and spent late nights scrolling through fanfiction on Wattpad. Like Belly, I yearned for the summer that would finally get the boy I'd been eyeing turn, a time of year that would put my life in perspective. However, there is rarely a clear storyline to growing up. My mother's diagnosis 2 years later, on a soggy summer day in Mexico City, marked the beginning of my coming of age. I wasn't Belly. There was no glittering first kiss, no debutante ball, and no volleyball tournament. Instead, when the word cancer entered our lives, I was seated in a doctor's office with my mother and one of my sisters. After surgery, I would soon learn how to empty the plastic tubes hanging from her chest. I would assist her in cleaning her wounds and taking a shower. You shouldn't see your mother like that at the age of 17, bruised, stitched, and in need of you. Eventually, the roles always switch, but this was too soon. I wasn't prepared to be anything other than her daughter. I was anticipating nostalgia, love triangles, and salt-sticky hair when I hit play on the TV adaptation of the books 8 years later, in 2022. It felt more like an elegy than I had anticipated. I recognized it from the opening scene. Susanna, the mother of the Fisher brothers, walking by in a silk scarf, Mr. Blue Sky playing as the kids ran through the kitchen. I couldn't have missed it, but you might have if you hadn't read the books. After my mother's cancer returned 4 months prior, the show's true plot, the silent fear of knowing something valuable was vanishing, became the one I was all too familiar with. With better lighting and a high-end soundtrack, the love story eventually faded away, leaving behind what felt like a mirror image of my own story. I had already chosen a side at the age of 15, and I still am on Team Conrad. I was drawn to the brooding, unreadable, and unfathomably cool older brother archetype. But as I watched him at age 23, I noticed the cracks, the sudden decision to give up football, the drinking and smoking in the middle of the night, the withdrawn and scathing comments. Conrad wasn't just being coolly enigmatic, he was also carrying a secret that was too big for him to handle. Then there was the tenderness, the way he held Susanna on the stairs after a night of too many cocktails and marijuana gummies and covered her with a blanket while she slept on the couch, fulfilling her dream of one last perfect summer. This was a young boy's choreography in an attempt to prevent his family and himself from disintegrating. That dance had been mine, and I knew it. I made myself an airtight container to ensure there were no leaks during the year between my mother's initial diagnosis and her remission. I attended parties, aced tests, and engaged in hallway gossip. I hardly spoke to anyone about what was going on at home, with the exception of 2 friends. I desired the security of the ordinary, of first kisses, of gatherings, of deadlines. I also needed a place where nothing had changed, where there were no IVs or hair loss. A haven where I was in charge. Conrad has a panic attack while boating with Cleveland Castillo, a writer who is spending the summer researching a new book in season 1 of SIP. Maybe if I just keep it inside, maybe that's what keeps her alive, he muses after suppressing the stress and grief of Susanna's illness for the entire summer. The adults in his life had assumed he was being moody or recovering from a recent breakup for weeks. However, that line revealed the reasoning behind his actions. the conviction that he could somehow preserve his world by keeping quiet and shrinking. I held a similar belief. I couldn't break if I didn't feel. Between physical education and English class, I would call my mother during her chemotherapy days, sounding calm and upbeat as though maintaining my composure would keep her alive. Pretending not to be scared, I was actually a girl stuck between lockers that smelled of body spray and perspiration. I considered stoicism to be a sign of strength. I believed that I would become a burden if I collapsed. The state of the wooden boat causes Conrad to have a panic attack. He snaps, claiming the vessel is infected, that is, moldy. Naturally, Susanna was the true cause of the outburst. The rage and the guilt that he hadn't realized how corrupt everything had become beneath the surface, for not noticing it sooner, are evident as they hit him in real time. I also put the blame on myself for everything I missed while I was so preoccupied with hiding behind school, not because of the illness. I didn't go to the hospital. I chose to ignore the symptoms. The closeness of sitting next to my mother on a difficult day. Would we have been closer if we had cracked open sooner? Or would I have been completely broken by it? I will never know. Years later, therapy helped me realize that, like Conrad, my silence had been a survival tactic, a crude, awkward attempt by a teenager to cope with the unachievable. I had ultimately gained time, but at a price. I could finally give that girl what I hadn't before: compassion. After watching the series as an adult and recalling the ways I'd punished myself for things I didn't know how to do differently. Susanna was gone by season 2. Arcade days, midnight swims, and well-timed pop songs were all part of the glossy world, but it was now laced with something more somber: the pain of remembering while attempting to move on. A larger time jump in season 3 allowed the characters to develop in the absence of that time. Belly made her own decision and traveled to Paris. Finally, Conrad starts talking, letting his emotions run free rather than smothering them. For once, he starts to assert his own needs and stops positioning himself to accommodate everyone else's. Beneath its sunny exterior, the show succeeds in showing that grief coexists with adolescence rather than negating it. Parties continue to take place. Love triangles continue to form. At the club, the pop hits are still playing. However, everything is in shadow. I sometimes wonder how many of us were walking down hallways carrying burdens that no one could identify, like our backpacks. Now, at 26, when I look in the mirror, I know that love isn't only about butterflies and excitement, and grief isn't only about breaking apart. They coexist in the same places, in the same people. Maybe that's why the summer I turned pretty feels less like a teen romance to me and more like a kind of life lesson. I've learned that even after someone is gone, the world doesn't stop. Music still plays, friends still invite you out, new relationships still begin. But that doesn't mean grief disappears. Instead, it becomes a companion, like a shadow that at first feels terrifying but eventually offers a strange kind of comfort. Just as the show reveals Belly and Conrad slowly learning not to hide from their feelings, I've had to learn how to speak mine out loud. As a teenager, I thought strength meant silence. Now I know strength is letting yourself be seen, sharing the fear, the sorrow, and the love instead of swallowing it whole. Back then, I wanted to push everything away: the illness, the fear, the discomfort of truth. But I know now that avoidance doesn't dull the pain. Looking at it directly doesn't erase it either, but it does give you the power to live with it. When I think back on my mother's fight, I don't only remember the antiseptic smell of the hospital or the cold hallways. I remember her laughter too, the way she found ways to reassure us when she was the one who deserved reassurance most. Those memories remind me that love is not only romance. Love is being a steady presence when someone else is falling apart. So when I see younger viewers today debating whether they're Team Conrad or Team Jeremiah, I smile quietly. For me, the story no longer revolves around who ends up with whom. For me, it's about how we grow up, how we survive loss, and how we redefine what love really means in the aftermath. I often think about that younger version of myself, the girl who carried so much without telling anyone. If she had spoken up more, maybe she would have been gentler with herself. But she did the best she could with the tools she had. And I've become who I am now because of those choices, however imperfect. Watching the summer I Turned Pretty today reminds me that love is never just a destination. Love is the journey, the laughter, the tears, and the people who teach us how to stand back up after we've broken. Please like, comment, and subscribe my channel.